it's just too much.
I'm gonna slip in here, Denise, and pop this on you.
Yes.
Like, is this good?
Yes.
Or is
Can I get a photo? Thank you.
Con piacere.
Let's get started then.
Mm-hmm.
Denise, it is such a pleasure to meet with you again, and thank you for finding the time for this interview. First of all, how are you?
As well as could be imagined. I'm a very old lady now.
But you look great today. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for coming.
So, looking at your biography, it is easy to find mentors and significant partners. Next to these meaningful personal connections, traveling and experiencing new places played a big role in your formative years. How did different geographies and contexts influence the formation of your creative approach?
That's a very, very big question. The book does it this way. The book that I think won't get published because it's going to be that long and that wide, because I want to describe not only the European medieval constrictions, but the breadth of Africa, America. So the book is hard to publish, but what the book does is try to show I responded to African environments and the very exigent political ones there. And then in England, it was a socialist government, and it was straight after the war, and that had all those things. And then also many family connections there. And then the next thing was to go to Italy, and but I had connections with Italy long before that. I will tell you about those too. And then the same thing, we eventually went back to Africa to see our families, and then after that went to America. And again, it's a very, very big environment. So I say the left lapel was South Africa, the right lapel was America, and the V-neck knitted sweater between them was Europe.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, as you have just mentioned, since your childhood, you had a special connection with Italy.
Yes.
And what was the role of Italy in your early years, and how its significance changed over time?
Well, I was born. You see, my family came from Latvia and Lithuania. Probably they came via Ukraine, and then they went to Africa in the 1903, something like that, around that time, and they were big Victorian families, 7 children, and I have lots and lots of aunts and uncles, and a family tree beyond belief how big it is. And it's in all different countries. But growing up, I was born in what was then Northern Rhodesia. And then when they saw that I might have gotten ill from being there, they returned to where my dad came from, which was South Africa, Johannesburg, and I more or less grew up there. But there was a time when my small sister, when she was 2, seemed to have caught polio. And the doctors recommended that we go overseas to England and see medical people there. Well, we caught an Italian boat called the Duilio. It later became an armed ship, but it was then a luxury boat going up the coast of Africa. And so my experience of that boat was the first thing I experienced after my own house or houses. And you know, little children, first they leave the house and they meet nursery school. And then they meet grade 1 and they love their grade 1 teacher. But the first thing I met was Italians on this boat. And there was a dining room for the for little children. And we were taken there, and there was an Italian waiter and an Italian waitress. And I don't know what his name was. We called him Zumpum. He was probably Zambioni or something like that. And he would grab a napkin and fold it over and make it into a swing, put us in the swing and swing us to our seats. So we loved him. And then Maria, the nurse, she would give me food, and she'd say, here's the food, 1, 2, 3, into my mouth. So I ate the food. And then I began to see 1, 2, 3. I was a funny little girl because I had my own baby research program. So I was learning to speak, to count in English, 1, 2, 3. And then what happens when you get to 29? Do you say 2010? No, you don't. I ask a grown-up passing by, do you say 20? No, you don't say that. You say 30. So I learned to go to 100. But that was in English. In Italian, I only managed to go to 3, and then Zumpum, because he knew it would make me laugh, he told me how to say 88, ottantotto.
Mm-hmm.
So I laughed away at ottantotto, and I had all of these nice experiences. And then at the same time, we went, there were other things like that, but we also, my father took me walking on deck with him. Now, this was not a time of feminism. Men didn't know how to look after 4-year-olds. So I had to kind of look after myself. He held my hand, and then eventually he did what he likes, put his hands behind his back and stride on the second class deck. So I put my eye on his jacket, and because where my eye was where the jacket and the pants met. So I kept following that line, and he kept moving, and I had to move, and all of that, and he didn't even look back. And then suddenly I thought, well, I better see what's up at the top. And my dad was blonde, curly hair, but I looked up and there was a bald head. So I knew I was lost. So that was a very big experience too. And what I managed to do was to look around and see where that curly hair had gone and reattach myself where it was meant to be. But that was a panic experience. I never told anyone about that. And then the next thing was, my dad came into the dining room one day, the children's dining room, and my mother was there, and there was a little American boy and his little sister, and I was there, and I was standing here, and he was standing here, and he was looking at me, and he was mad at me. He didn't like my English accent. So he said to me, water, water, butter, butter, when they came in. And so I wasn't grown enough to say butter, which is what I would have said. Americans say butter, but English people say butter. So I didn't say that, but my dad looked around at all of this and he said, Italian is a lovely language, you should learn it. Now, I remember that from 4. Mm-hmm. So 20 years later, I learned Italian.
As an architect, Italian architecture and history of architecture were, of course, of inspiration to you.
Yes.
But you also lived and traveled at length in the country and were able to discover some lesser-known aspects of its culture and of its landscape. What intrigued you the most about them?
Well, what I want to tell you first is that we had a little car called a Morgan in Italy, and wherever we went, it broke down. It was a very old car, 3 wheels, not a 4-wheeler Morgan, which you know, a 3-wheeler Morgan. And I knew all about this car. Well, what happened to us was every time we broke down, we would meet an Italian mechanic or a French mechanic. We would have supper with them or lunch with them, and lots of little children around. We would see their diagnostic technique. We were learning all sorts of things, but more from middle class, well, no, from lower class people in that time, except when we went to school in Venice. And finding a way, the way we had to meet with ordinary people and get on with them and have fun with them was very meaningful to us too at that time. But then when I got to America, and first of all, my first husband was killed, and I was a very, very sad young widow for a long time. But I had students. I met two people who came from Rome called Paulis, Anna Maria, and they were Italian students. It was by the time I had moved to California. And it said in their records that they spoke English very well. And I got there, and they didn't speak English at all. And one of my great achievements, for one whole semester, I taught them in Italian. It was really fun. Then you see, they'd had an academic English. They didn't, now they began to use it, and so they didn't need me as that. But when we got back, and they became very keen on all the things we were talking about the strip and all that, very intelligent, very well educated in Italy by great historians. And then when we came to Italy, we saw them every time we came, and we went often, and we were welcomed by them. Anyway, the point was, he said, "Let us take you to Tessa, to the home of your father." And we were, I think, on holiday near there, and they were also near there somewhere. So he came and picked us up, and we wound up into the hills, into Tessa, with our little boy, who was about 9 then, I think. And so we stopped, and it was very windy, and then there was only one parking space, and we took that parking space. And the first thing we saw when we got into Tessa, which was more or less where Bob's father's house was, we were standing, and one parking space. The other thing we saw was a donkey, and a donkey with its master. And later they sent us a picture of a donkey with a master and a long, long, long leather cord for the donkey to walk on the pebbles and the master on the street. And Bob Venturi had studied a lot of Italian hill towns. He didn't stay in the American Academy when he was there and read books. He went out, like I had done with Robert, and he went from village to village to village looking at things. And so, from that point of view, we just went with these people, and they showed us Tessa. But what was really moving to me was seeing how the cobbles went at a certain slope, which was for the donkey. And the donkey had a cord of wood on its back. That's why it needed that slope, which is what made the town windy and with the right. And when you look at where we were walking, it was on the sidewalk, but it too stepped up like this. And that to me was the essence of the Italian hill town. And so it was lovely just finding out these things. And then, of course, when we went to Siena, the donkeys also they went on the spurs like that, and the farmland came all the way up to the center of the town because it came up in the valley that way. And I've been Le Corbusier writes an article about how the donkey built the cities of Europe, and how the donkey was, how does he put it? The donkey does not go straight. He avoids trees and stones, and he goes round in curves. The donkey he calls stupid for doing all of that. And he says, when the streets are straight, the mind is clear. And I say, I too like New York. And there's many very subtleties about grid plans, but it doesn't, you can't have a grid plan in a Tesla. You won't get anywhere. So you have to, so I end my article saying it's clear to me that the donkey is the functionalist and Le Corbusier is the ass. And so if you're asking how we're reacting to environments, those are nice illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've described my experience of a Tesla, but we were much of the time in Venice. And in a way, you see, Rome is Bob's favorite city, and probably mine is Venice. But why were we traveling like that? Because Africa was in a really bad way. It was having all these revolts, and South Africa with all the problems of racism in South Africa. And our teachers said to us, there is no way of being an architect without knowing the great buildings of the world. And quite soon, this country is going to take away everyone's passport and you will not be able to travel. So as soon as you graduate, and before I graduated, I went to England to finish the last 2 years of my training, whereas my boyfriend then, and then my first husband, he stayed back and he finished and he joined me in England. So we were doing what our teachers told us, go and travel quickly and make a record. So I looked upon photography as you make a record of what you saw to remind you of it when for years and years and years you will not see it again. And Robert Scott Brown had his dad's Leica camera, and he'd been doing photography for a long time with his dad from a little boy. But when I got to Italy, I think we bought me a little camera, Furchtwängler, it was called, a German camera, but it was also a single lens reflex. And we began photographing there. Now, you see, you go to photograph something your teacher told you to photograph out from South Africa. Don't miss Palladio. And I didn't want to miss Palladio. And at the end of Bob's life, when I was going around and doing things in Venice, he sat in the hotel on the Zattere, and he just looked across at Palladio. But because he wasn't walking very well anymore. But so we went almost every year not almost every year, but well. And then we often went to Switzerland where my parents were living, and we picked up all their grandchildren who'd come from England to be with them, and we took them all for a week with us to Switzerland, or rather to Venice or somewhere like that, so that our little boy could get to know his cousins. And so these were the trips that we took, and the things we did were the things that we enjoyed, but most of it was just walking. And then, you ask people in Italy, in Venice, how do you find such and such? And the answer is, segua la corrente. So we told them about things like that, and we all followed the currents. And then there's another funny story about the alley that is so narrow that if two people pass, they one has to leapfrog over the other to get past because the roads are too narrow. It's not true, but it's a joke in Venice. So, but what is true is that you do find fat old men in. You see, Bob and I were both given an award by Italy, a commendatore. And then our friends told us, but a commendatore was a fat old man with a big stomach. And they said, no, look, it's not fair on us. So we're walking along Venice one day, and there's a big old man with a fat stomach. And there's a guy straight behind us. You see, I don't know who he is, I just, And as this guy comes up, he says, Buongiorno, commendatore. So they're right, they were right. Now, these were the sort of the fun things, but we were doing a lot of sightseeing. And you go to want to see one of these things, and on the way you see a church and it's got laundry hanging out of it. And you can't escape but take that laundry, you see, related to the church. Or whatever you found like that, political posters half torn away, and they look like 1920s futurist posters, with the lettering on them, but the lettering part torn off. So we did an awful lot of photographing of Venetian doorbells and posters and things like that as we walked along. And then I began to realize that act of you are walking and you are looking, and then in your eye you see something and you go click, 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 and then you see something else, click, click, click. The thing you went to photograph, you forgot about. You got the neighborhood instead. And then I began using those pictures to teach. And those are the ones I taught by, the ones that had sort of drawn my attention in that way. So then if it gets to why do I photograph, I would photograph a whole lot to share ideas with other people.
After your experience in Italy during the 50s, so I'm talking about the Siam Summer School, and then, of course, your collaboration with Giuseppe Vaccaro's office in Rome, it seems that you have always had a special professional connection with Italy. You were invited to take part into the Roma Interrotta exhibition in 1978,
yes,
and in the first Venice Biennale in Architecture in 1980. In the past years, I have spoken with many Italian scholars and architects, and among them Paolo Portoghesi, Carolina Vaccaro, Manuel Orazzi, and they all spoke beautifully about you and your work with Robert Venturi. And even recently, in a PhD seminar that we have organized at the University of Naples, Federico II, Donatella Mazzoleni, who is an architect, a professor, and a feminist artist, she spoke about you as a true master, una vera maestra, for Italian architects and for women architects in general. Do you think that Italian architects interpret your work in a different way? Do they see something that the English-speaking world maybe misses?
At the moment, I'd have to say yes, because you know what they're doing to our National Gallery. They are demolishing it. And this breaks our hearts. Well, I'm pleased Bob died. I'm not pleased Bob died, but I'm pleased he doesn't have to live through this. And I want to tell you, we have a petition now. There's a thing called change.org. And you can write there and say, don't do this terrible thing. And Nima, how many has it gone up in the last week?
In the last 2 weeks, we had 500 more signatures.
And I've been talking with some people in Australia, and they hooked the petition to the talk so people could write there and then sign it. And I would be very happy if many, many petitions came from Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when there was a petition, because Bob was given the Pritzker Prize and not me, and I stopped looking at that petition when there were 21,000 people who said, it's wrong, you should have given it to both of you. And so it would be nice to mention that this is what's happened in England, but the English are very, very angry too. But the people who are doing it I don't know what they have in mind, but they made Prince Charles promise that he wouldn't do what he did with the first competition, where he the English say what he had, well, they call it a wobbly. He lost his temper. He shouted, he screamed, he said, "You can't do this," and they stopped. And then they gave us the job, and people in the beginning didn't like it, and then they liked it more and more and more and more, and now they're taking it away again. And this, we believe, is because some developers have decided that if they can get rid of our, you see, it's listed as Group 1, which was all the great cathedrals of England and the National Gallery. So if it's in there and it can be removed, it means there's no building in England that cannot be removed by a developer, because they've removed from the highest level. And that's what they were trying to do, and that's what they are trying to do, so that later maybe they can one day demolish St. Paul's, who knows?
My dissertation starts with a quote you wrote in 1984. It says, "The work of our firm will be misunderstood and wrongly placed until it is seen in a broader intellectual context than is usual in architectural discussion today. This context spans architectural philosophies on both sides of the Atlantic." I would love to know what you think it means in retrospect and how you interpret your own voice exactly 40 years later.
Well, I'm very happy people are trying to do that. I look at some of the lectures I've given, and I couldn't do that now. In other words, my brain gets less able, which makes me very sad. But if you go and look in, I don't have trouble to find the words and all of that. But it's still hard for me to do more than to say, I have taken all the wonderful things that I have learned in different places to do with architecture and how you estimate it. And then I have turned to my other profession, urban planning. And I've seen how they criticized architects. And I've also had other coaches, like my father was a developer. He was a very brilliant, bright guy. And he had many things to say about how stupid architects were. And I listened to all those things. And there was a very beautiful building down in Johannesburg by all the faculty of Wits University together in Deco times, and it was lovely. My father used to say, how could they have been so stupid? They have stores at the ground floor of this building, and they put them with steps in front of them so no one will go into them. So eventually the stores are abandoned because they're not selling well enough. And he does a building, and he has the stores right there at the ground level where people come in, and right where they come from the elevators and the stairs, and all the things you might want to pick up if you forgot something at home and all of that. And then, being our family, he put one of his relatives to run the store. She was a widow and her husband had died, and now he found her a job. So he was doing many things. And his buildings have lasted. What's happened to them now in Johannesburg is they've been converted, some of them, into apartment buildings. So I listened to the things he said, and our teachers in economics and in sociology, and ones who, many of them had been refugees from Germany. I learned enough of these things when I get to Penn, and the social planners are really into what's happening to African Americans and what must we do about it? How can we learn to deal with it? And I had people there who later became also very famous in planning. And through them, I began to find ways to mix socialism and social planning and studying weather and climate, all that in with the designing of buildings. I realized that I could do a building which was separated to be studied as a building and then also one to be studied as part of life. And I wanted to do both things.
What would be the Las Vegas for today's architects? And where should we travel? And what should we look at?
Well, I was recommended to go and look at Las Vegas by one of my planning teachers in school. And but obviously I went to look at all the 1920s things, and I was recommended by Arthur Korn, one of my great teachers at the AA. And when Robert Scott Brown got to London and he went into a conniption, he said, just let me go and hide my head and I'll get a little job, and I can't go to that AA place. So I invited him to come to what English call my digs, where you live. And I invited Robert and I invited Arthur Korn, and I gave them scones and cream. And Arthur Korn sat and talked about the Bauhaus and the November Group. And by the time he was finished with Robert, he really wanted to go to school. And so that was another funny experience. And then we both went into a course on tropical architecture, and we saw how uninformed the English were about tropical architecture and how much we knew more than them. And all of these things stuck too. And then we got to America, and there was David Crane, and he'd grown up in Nairobi, I think. And he was very interested in taking the program for Chandigarh and doing it ourselves in our own way, learning from economics and the way transportation works and things like that, and mixing it with our love of historical architecture and knowledge of how transportation causes the patterns that you see, things like that. So that's how I came to want to do a book called Determinants of Urban Form.
The first time that I interviewed you, you invited me to work on women in architecture and to take action with my research. And I am deeply grateful for your suggestion and for your inspiration. What are the most urgent issues for women architects today, and how can we become better professionals and scholars and inspire society with our work?
Yes. It's a long story, and I can start that with a story not about architecture, but about a certain nurse. I was having to have an examination, and I forget all. It was to do with, I think, with my eyes. I was going to be taken across in a gurney, lying upside down in a gurney, looking at the ceiling and working out the plan of the hospital was an amusing thing. But this nurse, she came in and she said, you won't have to take off all your clothes. Now, I had, in fact, done that whole procedure the day before, and I had to take them all off. And then something went wrong, and the implant slipped, and I had to go quickly back to get it done the second time. So I knew I had to take off my clothes. And we said, I do have to take them off. She said, I have been here 30 years and I know what I am talking about. And then she opens the book and she says, oh, because she's wrong. But what she's got is this whole, she's been persecuted by men doctors all her life. So she's very, very bitter. And so one of the things I say to women is try to escape from that. Try to become so good at something that you love to do that men really want to hire you. And work along that way, work that they can see that you have great joy in what you do and you do this part very, very well, and they'll want to hire you for it. That's one of the things I said. But I also tell the stories of how people have done that to me, and then what I've done. I'm trying to think of some of those stories. When a person turns towards me and they've been introduced to Bob and they said, "Oh, so you're an architect too?" And I smile very sweetly. I say, "No, he's the architect too." But I try to get them to laugh, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just been too angry. You can't do that. They're just too awful.
Mm-hmm. So joy and making people laugh is a
Show
way.
them how good you are in your field and that they can really value you. And then try to understand sometimes those interns have a terrible time in architects' offices. They're really persecuted. Try to be understanding of the interns and what they need.
How was teaching your studios? How fun did you?
Well, you see, I had this enormous privilege of every semester I had the opportunity to define a research project I would do with 15 students. And that was my teaching. So I had to sit down and work out what is it I want to teach and how do I want to do it and how will I separate out these things for students. And I've recently come across someone writing about how they get, you see, when you go to Harvard and you go to studio and you teach there, they only come in to listen to the jury when their problem comes up. And I realized the reason is because they've all been doing the same project. Now, if you're all taking a different piece of a different project and you then have to come and see how yours works, you need to see how the other ones work too to see how yours works. So it's a very good thing to have 15 people each dealing with a different subject and 3 different stages. So that means that there's 45 different subjects and they're all going through this. And then sometimes I have to work quite hard to persuade them. They say, "We really don't want to do this thing about city planning." One year I had Fred Schwartz teaching with me and he was so good. He said, "How are we going to get this done very quickly for Denise?" You see, because they know I want it done, because I want them to study each of their separate projects in the context of the things in the city that I've been talking about. And they can't do that if they're not making an overall picture. We were doing it of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Make a picture of that. Show us where the drug centers are. Show us where the libraries are. Learn about that. And then where are you going to put yours? It depends on what you're designing, doesn't it? So they'd have to stand there and see and work out from what the other people are doing. Apparently there's a whole school of thinking which teaches like that now.
There is a quote from one of your studios in Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the preface of Mary MacLeod of the book of Frida Grant's about you, Denise Scott Brown in Other Eyes.
Yes.
And I really love this quote. "The task set is certainly an impossible one. As such, it should be approached with a true sense of adventure and with the courage and gaiety of despair."
Yes.
I really love it, and it really sounds like you had a lot of fun teaching.
You see, I say to them, I've asked you to find out all about dentistry in one day. Now, approach it with the courage of despair.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you didn't get along very well with Lucan. How was the relationship with Lucan?
Lucan liked what I did. And I was one of the few people who spared him criticism. I just told him, I think, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that?" And look, I had to say it several times, "Look at that poor person. Now how he feels after what you said." And Lou said, "I'll never come back to another faculty meeting." But he did. So it's hard to tell.
We have arrived at the end of our interview. What is your message to the students of architecture And to the young architects of today, what are the most urgent issues we should address with our work?
Down with the Athens Charter. In other words, use your own memories. Look how I've used 2-year-old memories and things like that. Have your own program for the research you want to do. From a child, love what you're doing and take it with you. Like when I say, I remember the little aspirin, baby aspirin used to come in little pill boxes like that. And I remember that very well. And then my mother, she was always telling me about art and architecture when I was a little baby and beyond. And I listened hard to her. And she used to read us a lot and show us beautiful picture books. When I was sick in bed, she was always there and I was always busy. When I got scarlet fever, she found that in the Ladies' Home Journal annuals, they had lessons in algebra. So she and I learned algebra together while I had scarlet fever. And when she got stuck and my dad came home in the evening, he would show us how to do it. And so we had a sort of family bonding through all of that. And so I would go into the library and lie and look at all her picture books of Impressionist artists in the library in our house. I didn't want to read their biographies. I just wanted to look at their pictures. And then when I started taking photographs, I thought of the pictures. I took a photograph of Bob with his back to the rear end of the strip. And I had in mind Le Corbusier telling people to, when they see a building they don't like, go around the back. You'll see it needed to be cheaper at the back. It'll be more functionless, so you like it more. So I was taking the backs because Le Corbusier said that. Then I noticed also that we were in the desert and it was hot. And we kept the door open on the door, but there were also these scale differences between the things you saw at different distances. And I put Bob in a certain place so he could be seen in relation to the open doors of our car, a big chimney of a house that had burned, and then houses at the back, which almost like the Tower of Pisa, you could measure your own height against the Tower of Pisa and photograph your nose lifting it. And then I said to Bob, and Bob was wearing a black suit because we'd had to go and try to get money from Las Vegas. And by the way, when we went to there, they didn't give us any money either. But there he was, and his back was facing me, and I suddenly thought of Magritte. And I said, "You haven't got a hat?" We didn't have any hats. So he just stood there in a black suit. You couldn't see his face, and he's looking out at the backs of the buildings. And that's my Magritte picture as well. And I'm always seeing those relationships from paintings that I remember.
And what city or urban phenomenon should we study and visit today?
I would like to know what Las Vegas is like now, but the places that are important places are Los Angeles, and then I'm forgetting about what I did see, but we adored being obviously in Venice, and the things we learned from all of those, and the things that people didn't teach us, but we learned for ourselves. And apart from that, I'd be going and looking at suburbia and seeing how it's being organized and getting done. And even this area around where we are here is a very nice one for examining.
Thank you, Denise. Grazie mille. It's been a real privilege.
Well, good. Thank you too. And I remember of former visits. So,
So,
basta così.
basta così.
Nima, do you want to ask a question?
From you or from Rosa?
What's that?
From you or from Rosa?
Either way.